We're joined by Adam Sheffer, the CEO of Originate Development. And Adam is, well, first of all, we have a project together. He's one of the most brilliant minds, I think, in the industry. And I really enjoy, by the way, Adam, I should have told you that, that I enjoy working with you. The session with Adam won't be a presentation. Adam and I thought of questions that could benefit the audience. So it will be more of a Q&A with me. Also to make it a little bit, to mix it up a little bit. So Adam, first, please introduce yourself, because I also think you have a very interesting story. So introduce Originate and your personal story, if you don't mind.
Sure. Thank you, Nama. Thank you for having me. Those are some very kind words, maybe not earnest, but very kind. We started Originate in 2017. And I started, being very focused in the missing middle. I had some experience working for my now partner, Daryl Furston, who ran and still runs another development company outside of Toronto in Kitchener, Waterloo, Hamilton. And those were municipalities that are really excited about development and really sort of champion the projects it's working on. And I brought that mentality to Toronto. And I thought that the way that I could do that was by focusing on smaller projects. I thought that that was the way to sort of be collaborative and work with the city and work with the stakeholders and building something that people want to see. So that's sort of where I started. And I really quickly realized what the challenges are citywide in building the missing middle. And we've since sort of stepped away from that and we've grown, and we're now focused on some much larger projects. The most recent acquisition we made is for about a 1,000-unit project, and the few before that are 250-unit condo projects. But we still have a project with Nama in the annex focused on laneway housing.
Sorry, I thought I muted myself accidentally. Okay, so when we talk about the risk of small, and I'm going to throw it right at you. What are the top three major challenges you would say a developer is facing?
Sure. So, maybe I can kind of answer it with a story a little bit and talk about my experiences. So that first project that we did in Toronto that we jumped into was 6 townhomes. We bought 2 houses in the annex on Brunswick that had a side yard on DuPont, and our plan was to reorient, to build townhomes on DuPont in what's becoming a pretty big hub, and spent a lot of time trying to be collaborative. I had 5 prelims with the city, 4 with the Residents Association, and 2 with the councillor. And I gave up quite a lot to sort of get everybody on board. And we tried to move through the process quickly because we'd given up quite a bit of density, and we said, we're trying to work collaboratively here. And we went the route of going to Committee of Adjustments. And when I went to Committee of Adjustments, I was opposed by the Residents Association and Transportation. And I sat back and said, whoa, what are the oppositions? The residents and I had a number of meetings, and they said, well, we have a new position. We don't like rooftop patios. And for that reason, we're opposing that element. And Transportation said, we really want to see a much wider 2-way driveway. So I called my contact at planning and said, listen, we designed this 1-way driveway. There's only 6 cars, so there's a signal and just a 1-way driveway because there's not a lot of traffic. Because you didn't want to see a 2-way driveway in a residential street, a 20-foot wide driveway. And they said, yeah, we still don't. And I said, okay, well, could you write in a letter to Committee of Adjustments saying that we're building this to your standards? And they said, no. As a policy, we do not write in and support. We either write in to say we don't like something, or we say nothing at all.
We quite, yeah.
So then I called the councillor, and the councillor said, well, we don't really do that either. And the residents are now opposing you. So, we like what you're doing. Good luck at committee. We were really fortunate to win, but the lessons I learned there were, one, no one's really going to champion you. So being collaborative is great. Getting people on board is great, but you don't have a champion in Toronto who's saying, we want to see this be built. You have people in Toronto who are saying, we're okay with what you're doing. Go check all the other boxes, the other departments. And I found that pretty consistently. 2, going into that Committee of Adjustments, I realized why developers come to fight all the time. It's very likely that you don't get your project through the approved channels and you have to fight. And one of the struggles with small is you don't have the budget for it. So if I had to go to the LPAT after that, I was really worried about the cost. And not just the cost of actually going to LPAT, but I hired consultants who weren't experienced at going to LPAT. I needed to save money, and I hired people who really do single family homes and said, yeah, I think I can take on this challenge. And that's how I made the project work financially. But that's number two. You know, you don't have a big enough budget to fight. You don't really have a champion. And then problem three, which we'll touch on later, is the financing. Financing missing middle is really tricky. There's a great system to finance condos, big apartments, great system to finance building one house or doing a renovation. There's not a great system in Canada to deal with what's in the middle.
So, okay, Adam, I have a few follow-up questions. Well, you mentioned that going through C of A, and just again, I want to make sure we cover all the basics. C of A is a committee by, it's a non-professionals. So it could be a dentist, a teacher making that decision. And then the appeal process is not LPAT, but TLAB, which is very similar in
Sorry, no, just to touch on that's right. But when I said LPAT, what I meant is developers are often preemptively putting in appeals. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of the way that you deal with a contentious project, by saying, I'm going to put in an appeal so that we're bringing an arbitrator into the mix and someone to kind of bring the bodies together. And that's where we would have ended up at LPAT, not if we'd lost a committee.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because our audience is coming from very different background, and I don't want them to feel behind. So when we talk about the community, and I can say that the fact that we are having the same debate over, you know, a 4-story building, the same as it was a mid-rise or a tall building, just speaks to the fact that how much it's not about height, because you can get a house in the exact same volume as if it was a missing middle project. And it just speaks to the fact that it's not about height. It's about having different people and a multi-unit and other concerns, not just seeing change and in generally matter. And I can also share with you, and that is now publicly knowledge, that the project that Adam and I are working on together, one of the most heard of comment that we had was, what do you mean no parking? And this is maybe something that we need to talk about, that missing middle should not have a requirement for sure for underground parking, because it will kill it right on the spot. So Adam, from your experience working with the community, and I know you touched on it on the but what is it that could be done? And the story was hard one, but what is the optimistic angle that you can bring, or maybe a different process, or what do you think developers should do?
The optimistic angle would be what we see in other municipalities. I think it's important for a developer to look at all the stakeholders, sit down with them, make sure they're heard, and incorporate what they can. But it's basically impossible to get everybody on board. That example of transportation is a really simple one. It's nothing crazy. Transportation wanted one thing, planning wanted another thing. I sat down and said, I can give one, obviously, but not both. Which one should I give? And the issue in Toronto is that there isn't somebody who's really steering the other people. So in another municipality, you would have a planning department or a city council who's really excited about development and wants to see that growth. And they would say, well, you've sat down with these people, you've heard them. Now let's make a decision together, and I'm going to steer you through the process. And planning would say, we're going to transportation and we're saying, sorry, we heard you, but we're doing it this way. We're going to the residents association and we're saying, you know, I know that you sat down with the developer. I can see he's taken a lot of what you've said, but unfortunately, we are going to have to stay with no parking, because that's the direction we're going in as a city. And that's what we're missing on every project, from big to small. There's no champion in the city who's your person, who you can listen to and say, I'm taking direction from them. Everybody wants to limit liability and say, go deal with every stakeholder individually, get them all lined up. And that's what's happening with the project Naama and I are on, building these laneway homes. The councillor and planner both said, we like the idea of building these laneway homes, but we don't like the idea of being the ones to fight it out with the residents or with engineering. So you have to go get everybody on board. And once everyone's on board, don't worry, then we'll make it easy on you.
You didn't tell us the end of the first project. Did it have a happy ending, or?
Yeah, that one had a happy ending. We won, and I took that lesson, and that's how I entered in the project I'm doing with Naama. I said, I still like the missing middle. It actually was a pretty non-contentious project. I enjoyed working with everyone, but I need to do something bigger because I need bigger, better consultants, and I need a bigger budget in case anything goes wrong. So I went and bought a site around the corner on Huron Street where we were going to build a 48 unit apartment building. 19 units were replacement and were affordable in a really rundown old building. And a year and a half into the process, this one was more contentious. We were within the height limit, we were within the allowable use, but it's in the neighborhood. And a year and a half into the process, it got designated heritage. So I turned around and said, I kind of have two choices now. I can go and fight, which would be at a body called LPAT, now LTO, or I can come up with an alternative solution. So trying to be collaborative, I said, well, we have a 130-foot wide property. What if we build 6 family homes, one for every 20 feet of frontage? They're a little more than 20. They're going to be 3 bedrooms. They're going to be family oriented. We're 200 meters from the subway. And I turned that question to planning and the Residents Association and said, would you rather we fight about this development or make it easy on me to build 6 laneway homes in the missing middle? And everyone said 6 laneway homes for sure. And now we're a year into that process and we still can't get everybody to agree. And we're having a really challenging time because there's so many voices. And even though planning and council say we like the idea, we still have a Residents Association who's saying, we think it should be smaller. We think you should build less. We think this is too much. And that's sort of where I said, okay, I see where the missing middle is going. And as I scale up, I see that I'm going to have the same challenges. And one challenge I didn't know, Nama, is, and this is a really, really big one, and this is what we realized on Huron, height is height. You know, even going to, whether you do it through the city or you do it through an appeal, if you're building a tower, you can squabble about height all the time. The biggest risk really is what happens on the first floor. Are buildings designated heritage? Are we required to give parkland? Is there a community space we're building? That's where the debate really comes into play. And when you're building a high rise, you have the ability to be flexible on the main floor. I'm building a condo at Bathurst and Richmond right now, and a building we didn't think should be heritage is going to be designated heritage. And we said, okay, you know what? We're okay with that. Let's preserve it. Let's restore it. Let's be collaborative here. And I'm going to lose a few thousand square feet in the podium, but the tower is going to be there and we're going to get the density. When you're building the missing middle, something being designated heritage or a parkland requirement or something else completely ends the project. Because, you know, if a 2-story building is being considered heritage and you were trying to build a 3-story new building, it's never going to be economical to build above it. And that's the real challenge with the missing middle. At grade is the hardest thing to deal with in a development. And when at grade doesn't go well and you're building low, you don't really have a solution.
And you're bringing a very interesting point, because in both of the cases that you mentioned, the heritage component was in a later stage. You didn't buy a property that you knew that was either not designated but not even listed. It was, I believe, in at least one of the cases was a move from the community that we get a lot in the city. At least 2 years ago, that was a real trend, kind of pre-COVID. It was real trend. Communities across the city went to the heritage register to get properties, neighborhoods, streets, districts listed on the heritage in order as a tool to avoid, prevent, slow down development. So what something that I'm reading from what you're saying, make sure that the property doesn't have any value that could be interpreted down the road as heritage, because in both cases that you're mentioning, it was not a precondition. So let's talk about, we covered the 2 of the 3 that you mentioned. Let's talk about financing small. And if you, first of all, let's make sure we cover the basic, but then if you can walk us through understanding what are the differences between as you go bigger.
Sure. This will take a few minutes, so bear with me because I know not everyone here is experience with project financing. So I want to kind of go over a few of the terms first. So one of the first things we think about in financing, which is a term most people aren't familiar with, is covenant. Covenant means how much the bank believes in you and how likely they are to lend to you. It's almost a qualitative term. And it really relates to 2 things. One is how much money you have, where the bank says, if this project doesn't go well, would we be able to find money elsewhere if everything goes poorly? And, the bank wants to make sure they don't lose money. Do you have stocks? Do you own a house? Is there something we could come after and collateralize? And 2 is how many projects you've successfully finished, how likely you are to be successful. Because a bank or a private lender is just looking out for their downside and saying, if things don't go well, where am I going to get my money back from? And how likely are things to not go well? The next thing is this term, and this relates to investors, skin in the game. When you're looking for an investor, what they're looking for is, do you have enough interest in the project to make sure it's always the most important thing for you? And skin in the game can mean a few different things. If you're Tridel, someone's saying, how much money are you putting into this project if you want to partner with me? And if you're someone who's starting out doing their first project, it might not be about the dollars. It might not be, how much money is Naama putting into this project? It's how material is that to her? Is this all of Naama's savings? Is Naama going to make sure that there's no way anything ever goes wrong? Or is this, a very small thing and there's lots of projects on the go and this could be at the bottom of the totem pole? And then the last we talk about is loan to value, which is really when you have a cost, whether it's land or construction, how much money the bank is lending you as a percentage of that cost. And understanding those terms, I'll sort of walk you through how really little things get financed and how really big things get financed, and then why the middle's tough. So a really tiny project, let's say you're buying an old house on Ossington, it's an 18-foot wide lot, and you're going to turn it into a triplex. When the bank looks at that, or a private lender, they say, well, this is a pretty low risk project. You're buying a house. Houses are pretty stable in Toronto. We know what they're going to be worth. There's a million people who could pick up this reno if things don't go well for you. So we'll give you a pretty high loan to value, assuming you have enough covenant, which means you have enough money and they believe in you. Now, if you don't have enough covenant, what's tough in these tiny projects is it's really hard to find an investor who will sign on the line for you. That's not the case as we get bigger, which we'll get into. But if, someone's just starting out and wants to go to a house and the bank says, you need someone to sign on the line with you, you need a co-signer, it can be hard to find that person. When you get to construction and you look at costs, a private lender will often loan 100% of cost on these smaller builds. So you can see how you don't need a huge amount of money. The bank's lending you a lot of the land, a private lender is lending you all of the rest of the hard costs. So the money that you need in these isn't huge. Now that's good because you don't need a ton of capital, and it's bad because if you're looking for a financial partner, and there's lots of big companies out there who are financial partners for developers, putting up the lion's share of the money and signing their name and giving their covenant, it's very hard to get them into a project like this. So the people that I really see that are successful with these smaller single home projects are people that often have enough money themselves or with a few friends to do these projects. And they're very successful. You're borrowing cheap money, you're borrowing a lot, so you don't need a ton. And I know a number of people who build 5 to 10 of these projects a year, whether they're severing a lot into 2 or renovating a triplex or building a laneway home or building a new home. And they often, between themselves and a few investors, have this cash on hand. And they're very successful because it's very, very simple. Now, when you get into a bigger project, things get much more complicated. The bank is willing to lend you a lot less money as a percentage of cost because there's a lot more risk. When you buy a site and you're planning to build a 50-story building, there's a lot that can go wrong there, both in terms of operations and in terms of zoning, a lot. So the bank's much more tentative, or a private lender. So there's a lot more money required. And because the check's so big, capital partners, companies who really just raise funds from investors and invest in developments, are very excited about these. There's a lot of companies out there, Greybrook being a big one. Harlow Capital is a partner of ours. They go out and they say, we want to write big checks. We want to be your partner. We can also lend our covenant and sign on the line, but they only want to write big checks. So you have the bank lending some money, you have a capital partner putting in as equity, the lion's share of the money, and then a developer putting in some money. And every developer is putting in a different amount. Everyone has their own deal. But that's how these huge billion-dollar projects are financed. And a developer is able to put in an amount that they can put in. They need enough skin in the game. But if you have a good operator, there's always a way to make it work. Now, when you get to the missing middle, this is where it gets tricky. Remember I was saying with a tiny project, the bank sees very little risk because they loan a lot of money. That's not the case with the missing middle. If you want to build any more than 4 units, typically, a bank starts to get relatively skittish. They don't understand laneway homes, so they're nervous about lending on laneway homes. A 6-plex is already like a big commercial thing, and they're lending you a lot less money at much more interest. So if this was a big project, you'd say, well, the bank didn't lend me a whole lot. Let me go find a capital partner. And that's the struggle here. that a capital partner still looks at this project and says, it's really small. For me to get my machine going and make marketing materials and raise funds, I want to be raising a certain amount because they really earn their money on how much they raise. So they're not excited about it. So now you have not a lot of debt from the bank. You don't have a capital partner. So you have to go and find your own investors, really. And I know there's going to be some great people speaking today, and they're going to tell you how they do it. And I'm not saying you can't be successful, but it is the hardest way to do it. When you look at a bigger project, I find the land, I call one capital partner, I call one bank, and that's everything. When you're doing a smaller project and you look at, I know the next speaker is going to be chatting about this. I'm sure he makes quite a few calls, and a big part of his day and his job is finding investors for these projects. And that's what's so tricky. It's a lot of money and there's no financial partner. And that's what's so hard. And this is a big risk in Toronto because when you're doing a condo or a bigger apartment, you have a huge budget. So if things take longer than they're supposed to, or you need to put in a little more money than you expect, you're typically able to absorb that. Whereas in the missing middle, you're not. That was my huge worry on that first project where we got appealed. We were paying, quite a lot for our borrowed money. If I have to spend a year in an appeal, that cost was huge to me. The time, the extra money we were putting in, I didn't know where it was coming from. We didn't really have investors. It was myself and, one partner. We didn't really know where the money was coming from. So that could have been detrimental to us in that early stage. And that's what's so scary about the missing middle, the ability to absorb risks.
That was fascinating. Thank you, Adam. I'm going to finish with one last question that is based on a question we got from the audience, but I'm tweaking it. If you could change one thing in the city to make the small scale missing middle easier or unlock the potential to make it what is the word I'm looking for? But to make it much easier from financial or the process or how long it takes, what would it be?
It needs to have its own process, similar to the way that a house has a process. If you build one house, you can get fast permits. Everything's easy. If you build a condo, you have to go through site plan and residence meetings. 6 units requires site plan and residence meetings too. We need to sort of move that needle so that we treat more missing middle projects the way we treat houses. It's much easier to get a house approved. And that's what we have to do. Remove site plan from some of these smaller projects and get someone in planning to really champion these and help you through.
Thank you. I think that was a tweak on a question we got. I don't think it's a question actually, but I'll read it anyway. I thought planning and development have committee meetings and sit together on each application together. Not sure about committee of adjustment though. Your stories are very interesting. Okay.
So let me touch on that.
Yeah.
So let me walk you through sort of what we get as feedback, taking this Huron Street project. So planning would take our application that NAMA produces and would submit it to every department in the city. The departments then give comments back to planning, and planning puts that in a memo and gives it to us. But they haven't had direct contact with these engineers. So they're not turning around to transportation and saying, no, don't worry. It's our guidance that we want to have less parking. All they're doing is relaying comments to us from every department. And that's what the struggle is. They're not moderating departments and telling them what policy is. They're just taking their comments and giving them back to us and saying, when all these comments are resolved, that's when you can have your zoning.
Will the financial expansion of the housing secretariat help to create this missing champion? No, because they deal specifically with affordable housing and the champion, again, I will let Adam answer, but the champion needs to be an advocacy group, someone who makes sure that a counselor, when they're making let's say the right move, they go to the news and make sure that the news cover what the counselor has approved. So because everything is so political, we need to make sure that we know how to, I would say, play behind the scenes to make sure that there is this champion. But right now, I know I volunteer with an advocacy group to increase affordable housing on the Housing Now project by increasing height and density. But this is a very specific stream that I'm working with, but there isn't one for the missing middle. So Adam, but would you like to answer about that champion aspect?
Sure, yeah, I'd say the same thing. Even someone like Naama in a volunteer advocacy group isn't enough. It needs to be an initiative internal at the city where the city says, hey, city planners, if there's a project of this scale and this tenure, we want you to do everything you can to meet with the other city groups and help get this approved. And that's what's missing. City planning still acts as a body who's just collecting comments and giving them to developers. They need to be moderating these comments and meeting with these other departments.
Adam, first of all, thank you very much. That went by really, really fast. We are now going to, unless you register to our networking session, you're going to have a 30-minute break, and we will rejoin at 11 a.m. We do have a networking session that is an exclusive session that you had to pre-register, and it's going to be very, very cool. The rest of you, we'll see you here at 11. Adam Sheffer, CEO of Originate Development, thank you very much for being here with us.